Welcome to this BC Strategies video podcast. My name's Kevin Keeler, and today I'm joined by a number of the BC Strategies experts, and we're going to talk about what we thought were one or two of the most significant things that happened in 2022. So this is our traditional year-end recap. I'll start us off just with two quick things from my perspective. Most of the customers and vendors I work with lean on my expertise around Microsoft Teams. But in 2022, I saw WebEx with their WebEx suite and Zoom both expand their bundles. So I think that was very significant because I saw those two platforms really taking the playbook from Microsoft around using the power of the bundle to really up their platform. And I think that was a major change, and from a foundational perspective into 2023, I think we're going to see that, bundle battle or, the showcase, the showdown of the suites. So that was the first thing, which I thought was a major shift. And then second of all, I think in 2022, we are starting to see AI integrated more directly and simply into platforms. So I believe more people are using real-time transcription, real-time translation, not as a cool demo, but just as part of their work. And of course, just at the end of the year, we're seeing a lot of interest around GPT chat and generative AI with the DALL-E 2 model. Now, those haven't yet kind of moved into the collaboration platforms. They are still more of the, cool demos, but I think we're starting to see AI deliver some real improved business outcomes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blair. Blair, what was significant for you in 2022?
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, for me, it was the whole idea of UC and contact center, or UCaaS and CCaaS coming together. Every vendor now talks about, the merging or the integration of UC and contact center. And as you know, I've been talking about this for a long, long time, and I can't recall how many times I've said, this is going to be the year of, integrated UC and contact center, but it finally happened in 2022. We saw, the launch of Zoom Contact Center. That was really big, and I think it highlighted the role of this integration. Even Microsoft, they introduced a digital contact center offering, which I still want to understand better. But and I think I've done more, webinars, presentations, consulting projects on, this integrated UCaaS and CCaaS in the past year than I've done, in all the years, leading up to it, all the years combined. The session that I did at Enterprise Connect on this topic, was packed. So there's a lot of interest in it. So I think I can finally say, 2022 was the year of integrated UC and contact center, finally. I think the other thing I saw in 2022 was the return of in-person events. I went to like 5 in-person events in October and November alone. And 1 week in October, there were actually 4 or 5 taking place, in this 1 week in 3 different continents. Obviously I couldn't go to all of them, but I was at a couple. And a lot of these were also hybrid events that were done really well. Zoom probably did the best job of tying in remote and in-person attendees, and they really did make it a truly hybrid event. RingCentral did a good job, Amazon, Salesforce. So we're really seeing this new hybrid event with, some people in person, some people remote, and really making it work together. So I think those were the 2 big things that I saw in the past year.
Okay, well, no, thank you. And the key takeaway is if you predict something every year, eventually it will become the year. So
eventually.
There you go. Steve, maybe over to you. From your perspective, what stood out in this wonderful year of 2022?
Yeah, so I think there's, thanks, Kevin. There's a real maturity, I think, going on around the CCaaS and UCaaS markets, where I think, as I was listening recently to Blair and John Arnold, as well as having my own thoughts on it. Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of layoffs this year, as well as just a a lot of competition where, the battle for features and functions is, head to head. Everybody's talking, of course, AI and, HIPAA compliance and PCI and all of the things that go with, a very robust contact center model, being one example. So, and not only that, but contact center, obviously, not just maturity, but the interest in it has really gone through the roof. And part of it is, the cost per seat is not overly expensive, anywhere between 120 to 150, per seat per month, and it's a quick ramp up and you get this full functionality. And it's interesting to see that, in the end, it's really about now customer experience, patient experience. We do a lot in healthcare, so we have to, change the phrase a little bit. And this whole notion of experience as a service where, not only is the customer the most important thing, but now the employee is also included in that whole stack. So it's quite interesting to see how, people a few years ago we walk into a lot of healthcare groups and we find that a lot of the contact centers are actually not contact center seats, but they're hunt groups or they're UCD groups with no data, no real-time stats, no reporting, et cetera, but they want to change it now. So where they were held to, very strict budgets now, they need this data in order to provide a better, again, in healthcare, a patient experience. So that's one major thing that we're seeing. And, it all goes back to this prediction 8 years ago, by Walker Group that stated that, customer experience would replace price and product as the main drivers for doing business with that company, so I always start a lot of my talks with that. So we're seeing, a lot of that. And the other one really, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, is the fact that, we've been talking features and functions all along, but we're not hearing a whole lot about reliability, So a year ago, October, there was a major AWS outage. And, I talked to one analyst who was not part of our group, and he thought it was going to really brush over. But no, customers are concerned. In fact, if there's any kind of departures whatsoever, by trying to find another vendor in the, cloud space, it's about the reliability factor. So a lot of them now are delivering either internet or some kind of SD-WAN to the site to provide some kind of, level of reliability and redundancy, but that still is, you can't control the whole SaaS model of, are you on AWS or are you on, Azure or whatever, and of course the vendor that won Best of Show last year, or this year, I should say, at Enterprise Connect was UJET. And they won because they had a 100% reliability model between both Azure, or I should say, sorry, Google Cloud and of course AWS. And they were the first to actually come up with an active model. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that because obviously with everyone investing in the cloud, if we don't, in fact, I met with a prospect recently, one of the largest healthcare providers actually in the US, and this contact center director interviewed me. And the first two questions that he asked me along with his other director was, what's the quality of these calls like in these cloud contact centers, and what's the reliability on it? So, I mean, here's an end user who's asking those kinds of basic questions, and that to this individual was more important than the feature function. So I think, between those two areas, I think we're going to go into 2023 again with, a maturing of both of those areas. So yeah, looking forward to 2023. And thanks, Kevin. And as we say at BCStrategies, back to you.
Well, that's good. Thank you for your insights, Steve.
Sure.
I think, I mentioned AI, and I'm always hesitant to do that because we have Joseph Williams, the resident expert on AI. So I think I'll go to you, Joseph. Was my mention of AI, was that something significant in 2022, or what did you think was significant to the past year?
Oh, Kevin, that's so 2017.
See? Got it wrong. 5 years. It takes me 5 years to catch up to you.
Yeah, I mean, to the point one of the other experts made, we started talking about AI in BC about 5 years ago. And so it has caught up. It is a thing. It's part of everybody's marketing stack now. In this field, what's super interesting to me is the focus on next best action, NBA, in the contact centers. I will tell you that the AI for NBA is not very good. But but it's an emerging field with a lot of investment going into it. And I think it's a focus not on customer experience like Steve was talking about, it's a focus on revenue. And I think that will get a lot of attention because obviously everybody cares about revenue. But AI is so yesterday. So 2022 for me was cybersecurity issues coming up in unified communications platforms. A lot of problems. There were some folks who got fired, some folks who are under investigation for some bad things they did on platforms. There's also the idea that Zoom or Microsoft or Cisco have these fortified platforms that are completely secure. I think that myth has been blown out of the water now. And so you're starting to see some interest in that. And then I'll go really out there on a limb and say, I have seen some interest in how the metaverse is going to be integrated into business communications. I don't know if you saw, but Elton John just announced a 10-minute concert he's going to do in the metaverse. There are now universities formally holding classes in the metaverse. Nike is doing brand promotion in the metaverse. And so eventually we're going to have to figure out how do we communicate with each other in the metaverse and how do we bring it back into the physical world and what that looks like. So Kevin, if I'm going to forecast 5 years out, I think cybersecurity is today, but I think metaverse will be 5 years from now. So we'll be back in 2027 talking about how metaverse is so yesterday.
Well, no, and thank you, Joseph. And in fact, Tom Brennan and I, another of the BCStrategies experts, we're currently just wrapping up a survey around augmented reality and virtual reality usage and adoption. And, because there's not enough quantified data. So I think this is something that BCStrategies experts, what we try to do. We're looking forward to sharing those results into 2023, but there is some growth, but the initial data is a lot of people are dipping their toes in that. But I don't know if that's a segue. Speaking of dipping your toes, I don't know, but Elizabeth, 2022, anything with toes that you can work
with
in?
toes, all right. Well, I can say that, yeah, as you've been saying, you make a prediction, eventually it comes true. And I'm thinking about dipping our toes into WebRTC back in the day when it was a big thing.
Well done.
And and it didn't really take off a whole lot. But one of the things we're seeing a lot, especially in the CCaaS space, is a lot of the providers used to say, yeah, give us some SIP trunks, we'll send the calls to your agents over SIP trunks. And now they're all proposing WebRTC, which is great, right? We're taking those voice calls and really putting them where they belong, back in the stack with everything else. And so that's a huge trend in the CCaaS space that we're seeing. It's a great option, people not having to put in SIP trunks and MPLS and all those other things that make things complicated and expensive. And, let's just run that over WebRTC. So that's dipping the toe in a micro prediction, maybe more on the macro level and a little less about the technology. I hate to bring up the pandemic, but early on, everybody was grabbing all the technology that they could get implemented as fast as they could. We got shadow IT, we got multiple apps, we got, environments where everybody has a little bit of everything. And it was all good because as long as it was working, remote people could get into the solution and do their business, it was great. So what we're really starting to look at now and hear a lot from our clients both last year and what we're predicting for 2023 is let's take all of those tools that we're using and make a strategic plan. And in particular, the strategic plan needs to be less focused on the technology and more focused on the workflows in the business process. Let's stop buying the technology and plugging process into it. Let's go meet with the people that are using it, figure out what their workflows are, where they intersect with communications technology, come up with a strategic plan around that. And along with that, where we used to talk a little about best of breed, now people are thinking about their ecosystem as a whole, focusing on what integrates well, and picking an environment and an ecosystem where they can integrate things end to end and improve their efficiency and workflow moving forward. So that's our prediction for 2023. Let's stop talking about the tools and start looking at the business and figuring out how the tools support the business.
So if I can, so
yeah.
Jim, that sounds to me a little like communications integrated to optimize business processes. Where have I heard that before?
Yes, I think you're right, Blair.
So and with that, Jim, from 2022, maybe over to you for what stood out for you in this past year.
Well, I consult for vendors. I help vendors partner with other vendors. So a small vendor wants to partner with Microsoft, Cisco, or Zoom may come to me and help with that. So my interactions with the vendors is a little bit unique. And the thing that I observed this past year was that while everyone's talking about how they're going to be delivering hybrid work, and they talk with all the confidence in the world, after a glass of wine and you poke a little hole in what they might have said, you realize they're still trying to figure it out. And I've had that confirmed as recently as just 2 weeks ago, where I was with a major vendor and they were talking, and I brought this up and they said, yeah, you're right. We've been working as hard as we possibly can to figure out what to do with hybrid work, and we're still working on it. They don't know. And I think, Beth, your comment was exactly right. The customers are going to try to figure it out. So the session that I do at Enterprise Connect, that will be one of the highlight topics is where are we on hybrid work, trying to help the enterprise customers figure out what's next. The second thing that I would talk about, and it's kind of interesting, I'm surprised someone hasn't brought this up. It's kind of like the elephant in the room, Avaya. We know that Avaya is going through a very, very challenging time. And, there are people who say there's no way out. There's people who say they'll figure it out. But one of the things that's absolutely clear, Avaya is, and you could argue whether they're number 1 or 2 in contact centers, but it doesn't matter. They're a major contact center vendor. And that business is going to change. And if you were an enterprise customer, would you feel comfortable telling your company, let's go with Avaya? Oh, I'm sorry, did you read that they already said that they may not be viable? And as a company, how do you make those recommendations? So I think we're going to see an enormous amount of market grab in the marketplace. And talking about what I've seen this year is the vendors all lining up to figure out how to compete with it. And it's very exciting, and I think we'll see the outcome of that next year. But I think one of the big issues this year is Avaya, what will happen. And Blair, I'm sure you remember, Marty Parker, Blair, and I had conversation, it had to be at least 10 years ago, saying Avaya is not going to make it. And here we are still talking about it and making and commenting about their demise. Is that going to happen? I don't know, but clearly they are damaged and there's some challenges. But Alan Mazarak, who's running it, I would never count him out. He's a great guy, and he's smart enough that he wouldn't have gotten into this unless he had a great plan. So we'll have to wait and see. So,
and we actually had an analyst briefing with Alan this morning. He was talking to the analysts and talking about, what steps that they're taking and what they're doing, and laying out their picture.
Yeah,
I'll remind everybody how long it took Nortel to die. It takes a long time.
That's good. There you go. Well, thank you for your insights, Jim. You mentioned your session at Enterprise Connect, and I think it's, we were talking before we started this video podcast. Right now, I think it's 17 sessions that the BCStrategies experts are delivering right now on the schedule, and I expect that might go up. So there's a tremendous amount of content, Jim and Blair and a bunch of us, are delivering at Enterprise Connect. So definitely look for BCStrategies sessions there. And Dave, we've left you to last, but you've heard what everybody else has commented on. Did we get any of this right? What did you see that stood out for you in 2022?
Yeah, so pressure to be unique now, right?
Exactly, it's hard. We've used up a lot of things.
Yeah. It's funny, what Joseph was talking about Elton John. So he's announces he's leaving Twitter. So I guess the metaverse is next, right? So, whole other discussion, right? But I think for me, this year, with all the events that we went to, it was great again, as Blair was saying, to be in person. So that was great. Seeing many of you in person, you really sort of appreciate it, right? After the last few years of what we went through. But I think for me, we have witnessed, I think, the evolution, and we sort of talked about this a little bit, of the communications and collaboration, space, the suites to UCaaS platforms that are now evolving into fuller, all-encompassing digital workplace platforms, right, with deeper integration with, CCaaS and strategic lines of business applications. And I think as a result, the lines, I guess, are starting to blur a bit, and I guess the days of silo applications that just do one thing, like conferencing, are sort of, I guess, giving way to, to fuller platforms, right, aimed at being more strategic solutions for businesses. And I think, and that's what I took from all the events this year, right? Every vendor seems like it's trying to add or figure out how to add the right adjacencies to complement, their existing platforms and grow their ecosystem. I guess big case in point, some of us were there was, I guess, Zoom, right? They're filling out their offering with email, calendaring, integrated team chat, and what have you. And from a different perspective, I was at their event, Salesforce, right? From a different space as well, too, making Slack now the collaboration, I guess, or collaborative hub of the Salesforce platform. So I guess to me, we saw that theme emerge where in all these platform offerings that we're seeing emerge, sort of what I'm calling these new era digital workplace platforms, the collaboration hub or anchor, or the gravity is sort of these persistent team chat and messaging that sort of sits contextually, so I guess to minimize context switching and support how people actually work, as Beth was saying, how do you sort of get down into the flow of how people are actually working and make it make sense for them. So that's kind of what stood out to me.
No, that's a good point. It seems like everybody has a platform. I expect my Nespresso coffee maker is going to have a platform, have an API, and I think everybody wants to have a platform. So I appreciate all of those insights, as usual with the BCStrategies experts. Lots of different opinions from lots of different perspectives, which I think is what makes this exciting. We talked mostly about 2022, although some of us gave predictions for 2023. But after you watch this video podcast, our next one will focus more on the future. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, take care.